my fellow comic book collectors, it's Alan, the Comic Collector Geek, and this is the Wednesday video where I answer your questions. Every Wednesday, people ask me questions, and the next Wednesday, I answer them. And if you have a question you would like answered, just put it in the comments below, and I will answer it next week. And you can ask me some cool things, like, I do some research for these videos, and this video has that as well. So where I did a lot of research. So first question comes from Mark Webb. Are you familiar with the horror comic Grave Tales published by Cemetery Dance magazine? There were only 7 issues in the run, but it featured some good stories like Joe Hill, Ray Garton, Rick Hatala, and Ed Gorman. I've got a couple of them, but eventually I'd like to get the entire run. Actually, I think the run lasted 8 issues. It was in 1999. I was not familiar with it before you asked this question. I never heard of it. Had a very EC look to it, from what I could see. But I have never read it or don't really know it. So I was actually familiar with Grave Tales from the 70s. There was a similar kind of comic from the 70s, but I wasn't familiar with the 1999 run. Looks interesting, though. That's all I can say. K. Munin wrote, on your November 18th live stream, you showed off your foreign Vampirella books. What first drew you to the foreign comics? Are there any foreign comics that you currently are on the lookout for? Okay, so I'm a completionist, and the first collection I really tried to complete was Warren Publishing. I tried to get everything that they ever produced. So as I was completing the American version, I was hearing that there was other countries that had published Warren books, and I was like kind of enticed by that idea to pick up those foreign editions. So I picked up the UK editions, the Japanese editions, the German editions, the French editions, the Spanish editions, like all these different editions, Argentinian editions. And I kind of wanted to really get all the different versions. As a completionist, it was more of a completionist thing. Now, I'm not actually complete in the foreign editions of Warren. I have the complete Spanish. That's the only one I've managed to finish, and the complete British, actually, and complete Japanese. I have a few complete, but there's a few that I'm missing. So I'm still have a few books within the Australian ones that I'm missing, and there's a few within the Mexican one I'm missing. I'm missing about 5 of the Mexican ones, and I'm missing some of the the various other countries. I think I heard that there was Cambodian editions. I don't have any of those. I heard, I don't know if they exist, but those would be cool. So there's things like that where I think those are interesting. The other thing that was sort of intrigued me about these foreign editions was the fact that they had unique covers. A lot of them had unique covers. Some were just reprint covers, but there were many non-unique covers that were really interesting. The other thing that was interesting was a lot of the foreign editions had unique content as well. So what they would do is they would have like the reprinted stuff, and they would translate it, but also they would include some local stories as well from local creators. So I always thought that was interesting. So some of the stuff is pretty cool. The French editions are really interesting. They're much thicker cardstock. Like the covers on them are like really thick. And they would have like movies, like French movies included inside. It was pretty interesting. So yeah, things like that I really liked. The next question, so that's why. So Mr. E, the low-grade king, I've noticed that bronze and copper age Canadian price variants are commanding a bit more money. Do you think it would be a good investment to buy Canadian price variants? Okay, here's the way I see it. There's always going to be a niche collector for the more difficult things. Like, so for example, when a comic has like, it's a very popular comic, like I would like to say like something like New Mutants 98. Okay, you got New Mutants 98, Deadpool's first appearance, right? It's big book, everybody wants it, but there's lots of them out there. So what ends up happening is people go, okay, well, I want to have something slightly cooler, but still I like to have, the first appearance. So something that's slightly cooler is the newsstand. The newsstand, a little bit more rare, harder to get in high grade. And that's generally where the collectors will go. Like collectors like to have something that's a one-upmanship of the other collectors. So that Canadian price variant of the Copper and Bronze Age, that's a sort of one-up, where generally the Canadian editions were about a tenth of the American editions, and therefore it's cooler. You can say, oh, I have the Canadian edition. It's a little bit more rare. It's actually a lot more rare. But that only goes so far, which is interesting because the British editions, which are actually more like 100th or 150th of the American editions, don't really command more money. They actually command less, which is odd, but it's true. It's one of those things that I always was confused by, why certain niches people don't like. The Canadian edition, maybe because it's so much more close to the American edition in terms of look. It has still the dollars on it and stuff like that. Therefore, it's more accepted. But do I think they are a good investment? There's always going to be that niche. Now, here's the way it works with a big market versus small market. Right now, we're in a small market where the collector pool is a lot smaller than it was during, say, COVID. The collector pool during COVID was really quite big. Because you had new collectors coming in that were like from the card trading company, the ones that were interested in sports cards and stuff like that were also coming into comics. You had the investor class that was also coming into comics. You had people that had sort of left collecting comics but got re-inspired to come back to comics through MCU success and stuff like that. They came back to collecting comics. And all of a sudden you got all these groups competing for comics. So you got a huge demand, not very much supply. Well, in those kind of situations, these more obscure books become even more desired because there's just enough demand to go beyond what the supply has. So right now, the Canadian price variants, though they are more desired, I don't know if how they do in a market where there's just maybe not enough eyeballs to be absorbing all the different options that there are. Now, it could work the very opposite way, where because they are more obscure and there is just sort of a oversupply right now rather than high demand, that actually the more obscure things have more value. I'm not really sure about that. I haven't really seen many Canadian price variant sales data. Like, I haven't really seen the data, how they fared. What would be interesting is if if there was a much easier way to look at that census, where you say, okay, we know that a lot of the books that were super hot during COVID, they went down 75%. Like, a lot of them, like, brutalized. It's just amazing how much some of the big books from COVID had these amazingly huge drops. Now, how did the Canadian price variance fare compared to that? I don't really know. It's something that I really would like to investigate, and maybe I'll actually do that investigation as a separate video, because I believe that merits its own separate video to really see how well that those Canadian price variants retain their value. My thought is that what probably happens is, because they are more rare, what I did notice with the COVID jump and then subsequent fall is that books that didn't sell during COVID kind of held their natural trend lines, whereas everything else that was kind of selling during COVID kind of went through these really big blips and then back to the trend lines, or even went below the trend lines because they were overcorrecting for that massive spike. The ones that that didn't get the rise during COVID actually fared the best, is my point. And maybe the more obscure comics, because they didn't, they are less likely to sell as frequent, they might not have had that damage. So I don't know. It seems like a very long-winded way, but to say it could be a better investment, I will actually do that research more for you, and maybe do a separate video where I look into how well those Canadian price variants performed compared to the American ones, because I think it is an interesting topic. Okay. The same also applies to newsstands, by the way, and Mark Jewelers would be the other kind of niche markets within that same question. I'd love to see how all three of them compare to each other even. So yeah, that's a very good question. MJ Chick wrote, what is the best way to find out about comics from a certain year? Okay, so MJ Chick wants to do the following. He wants to collect comics from a particular year. Well, how do you find out what comics were published within a year? Well, there's actually a site where they list all the comics ever produced and the year, the month when they were produced, even the week. So you can find out exactly when comics came out, and you can scroll through all the pictures. It's almost like the Gerber guide, but it's online. It's called mikesamazingworld.com. And basically you can look up the year, the month, and see all the comics that were produced during that time and when they were produced within that month. So very, very useful. I used it many, many times to do my research for videos, or for when I'm looking for certain things. Like when I was doing my research on bikinis, like when was the very first comic with a bikini in it? Well, I used that list to see all the covers from a particular date. And I went to the very first date right after the invention of the bikini and found the very first comic with a bikini in it. It just happened to be Gay Comics 22, I believe. Just a really cool, kind of cool research. So a very cool site, mikesamazingworld.com, all one word. So look for that. It's a really good site. Okay, next question comes from Deadman. What issue was the first appearance of Vicki Vale? According to DC Database, it's Batman 98 from March of 1956. But in Batman 208, there's a reprint of a Vicki Vale story from Batman 76 from 1952. Is there an earlier story? Okay, so actually, none of those are the first appearance of Vicki Vale. The very first appearance of Vicki Vale, and I'm surprised that it doesn't say this on the DC Database, was this book. This is the first appearance of Vicki Vale. This is Batman number 49 from 1948. It's also a very cool Joker cover, and it's also the very first appearance of the original Mad Hatter. So if you want to find the Mad Hatter and Vicki Vale's first appearance, this is the book. It's a very cool book with a very cool Joker cover. So definitely a cool book. So yeah, I don't know why DC Database would give you the wrong information, but that is the first appearance of Vicki Vale. Okay, next question comes from David Amusin. I'm totally brutalizing that, David. So, oh my goodness, I'm reading that totally wrong. Like when it's all squished together, it messes my brain up. So David Samuelson. Oh my goodness, I was reading like, man, I sound like a retard. But oh well. Man, my reading skills, so wonderful. Okay, so yes, David Samuelson. Sorry, I totally messed that up. Your back wall is very nice. Did you ever do a top 25 book video? Not really, but I have done top 50, and I even did a top 100 once. But I think I'm long overdue for a top 25. I think I should really do a top 25. So this Friday, as my Friday challenge, I'm going to do my top 25 books. And I'm going to do it based on price. Just easiest to do, like, to try to say, oh, I love this book more than this book, it just becomes a big mess and, changes on a daily basis. But price makes it really easy. So I'm going to show you my biggest top 25 books on the Friday video. Stay tuned for that. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, even though I mess people's names up. Subscribe to the channel, and you can see that video on Friday where I'll post out my top 25 books. They will be impressive. So definitely stay tuned for that on Friday. Okay. The next question comes from I Like What I Buy. Is there a reason that Action Comics 183 from the year 1953 requires a premium price of 100 plus? Is it a key or just a sweet cover? Can you show some Action comic keys that are under So yeah, I could show some Action comics that are under the radar. These are not necessarily under the radar. Some of them more obvious than others, but sometimes people don't realize the significance of different books. And if you know them and you see them out in the wild, well, you can pick these up. So first is Action Comics number 254. Very cool. This is a super cool book. This is actually the very first appearance of Bizarro. Now, everyone's going to say, well, no, that's Superboy, whatever. I think it's Superboy 80. But that is actually a different Bizarro. That was a Bizarro that was Bizarro Superboy, and it dies. It dies during the comic. It ends with its death. This is the first time we get a Bizarro Superman, and it's the one that is still living on throughout all the comics where it's Bizarro. So yeah, so this is the first appearance of Bizarro. Both are major keys, but that's the, the Action Comics one. And sometimes people don't realize how significant that book is. This next book is Action Comics 261. And this is the very first appearance of Streaky the cat. So if you ever wanted to get Streaky's first appearance, well, that's Supergirl's pet, super pet. This is where you can find it. The next one is, oh shoot, this is, no, I'm not going to show that. It's Adventure. I grabbed the wrong book. This one. This is Action Comics number 251 with this old looking Superman on it. Well, this has a one-page ad for Action Comics 252. In the ad, it actually has a unique cover for 252 shown with a unique text. So it's interesting because this one is kind of almost like a preview or cameo for Supergirl's first appearance. So this is Action Comics 251. This book has been sort of under the radar, but now people are kind of learning about it. So definitely a cool book. First appearance of Supergirl cameo, maybe. And if you want Supergirl's first appearance, well, it's the next book, 252. So this is Action Comics 252, which is a great book. Actually, in the ad, it's really interesting because her skirt is red in the ad. So it's slightly different. It's the same image, but the coloring is different, which is interesting. And also the text bubbles are different, which is really interesting. So Action Comics 252 is a cool book as well. That's the first real appearance of Supergirl. Then we got the next one. This is another Bizarro one. This is Action Comics 255. So all in that time frame, like 250s. Had a whole bunch of keys. This is the very first appearance of Bizarro Lois Lane. So that's her right there. And some other, this is more of an under the radar key for Action Comics. Again, similar idea to the one that you asked about. The reason the one you asked about commands more money is it's a cool cover. Well, this is another cool cover. It's the Bullet Catch cover. So it commands a bit more. It's just like the one where Superman's getting a haircut. another book that commands a little bit more money just because of the coolness factor of it. Cool covers always will command a little bit more money. In the one that you refer to, Action Comics 183, it's a really cool cover, like where he's got a whole bunch of things bouncing off his chest. So people like it. Here's another one that's sort of under the radar. This one actually, strangely, is under the radar. This is Action Comics 42. It's not a cheap book, but it doesn't sell for as much as you might think. It's the very first appearance of Vigilante. So kind of a cool first appearance of a Golden Age character. And one that I actually think has good potential of going up even further than it already has is this one. Action Comics number 242. And this is the first appearance of Brainiac. That's a very cool cover. So this is a Kirk Swan cover. And my last Action Comics key that I can show is Action Comics 276. And this actually is the very first appearance of Brainiac number 5, Sunboy, Phantom Girl, Triplicate Girl, Shrinking Violet, and Bouncing Boy. So lots of first appearances in this book. Very underrated book. Very cool one. Has a whole bunch of first appearances. If you ever wanted to get a whole bunch of first appearances, well, this is the book to look for. Just look for this one with a giant Supergirl and a whole bunch of little Supermen. So, very cool one. Definitely one to look for. I hope that answers your question. I hope you enjoyed those Action Comics. Okay, next question comes from Son of Crom. If you had the chance to get Action Comics number 1 in a conserved 8.0 or a restored 8.0, which one would you choose? Okay, so this is one of those tricks that you have to know about conserved versus restored. Conserved books generally go for about half of what the blue label goes for. In low grades, restored books go for about 80 to 90% of the value. Okay, in high grades, they go for about anywhere from 10 to 20% of the value of a blue label. So a conserved grade in an 8.0, because it's a high grade, would be a better choice just by sheer math. Generally, you're going to get half of that 8.0 value, whereas the restored one would probably get about 30% of the 8.0 value. So mathematically, you get an extra 20% of the value. So I'd choose the restored one. Also, restored is a bit better anyways. I feel like it's that highest level of restoration. I don't know why the restored books, the conserved books don't get the love that they deserve. Like, you know, they don't have that weird variability in value based on grade. It's weird that they don't. they generally go for, as I said, 50% of the value of a blue label, regardless of grade, which is odd. So I think in a weird way, I actually kind of can think of one reason why that is the case. In low grade, you would expect them to do more conservation to bring it maybe to a higher grade, but that's not the case. So I don't know, it's weird. So definitely I'd go with the conserved book. Also, it's a blue label, so it looks better. Matt Likes Comics wrote, in your opinion, how big is the market for Canadian whites outside of Canada? Should we look far and wide in order to purchase these wonders? So outside of Canada, the Canadian white market is there. There is actually a market for them. Just like foreign editions, like the people collect foreign editions. I answered a question about that earlier. The thing is with the Canadian whites, most people don't know about them outside of Canada. It's again one of these niche collectors thing where people don't necessarily go for them because they just don't know they exist. I actually see them as being one of those things where once people do realize about about these Canadian whites, they will think that they're pretty cool. They'll realize how scarce they are. They will realize how sensitive they were to destruction of the Golden Age, because not many of them survived. That they will become more desired. They are pretty cool. So I'm going to show you some from my collection. I'll give you an example of a Canadian white. As I was mentioning in the previous question, where I was saying foreign editions sometimes have different covers. Well, that was the case with the Canadian edition. So this is Whiz Comics, volume 3, number 6. It's a double A comics from 1944. It's a Canadian white. And you can see it's got a very cool cover. It's a Good Girl art cover. Now, if you actually look through the Whiz Comics title, this cover does not exist. It's only as a Canadian white that it exists. There's like maybe 1 or 2 of these on the census. This is a really rare book. And it's like, it's a Good Girl art book, so you get like collectors going after it for that very reason as well, because it's a cool cover that you just don't see. So, that's one of the things. I think once people are kind of more educated about Canadian whites, they will generally desire them a bit more. Some Canadian whites aren't that expensive, and even in high grade. I'll give you an example. This is 3 Aces. It's a 7.0, which is a really high grade for a Canadian white, actually. This does not go for much money, maybe $100-$200 for for a Canadian white, and it is kind of back down to that cool cover element where Westerns don't really go for that much. This one is a little bit more easy to find, these 3 Aces. So yeah, it's one of those things where certain Canadian whites are actually fairly easy to obtain. And this one is one of those, just as an example. Now, people generally, with the Canadian whites, they generally prefer the ones that are more like the first one I showed, or like this one, where it's like these 2-tone ones. Now, normally people like the multicolor things and more vibrant colors. Well, with Canadian whites, it's the opposite. The reason being, it looks more primitive, and they're more likely to be destroyed by just time. Because the ones that were like these 2-tone ones generally had not as good paper quality as the ones with multi-tone. Both are considered Canadian whites. The reason they're called Canadian whites, and the reason the term exists, was during the Second World War, there was a trade embargo between Canada and the United States. Canadians were not allowing American comics to come into Canada, and what we would produce them ourselves in Canada, and we would do it very cheaply, where we wouldn't use color ink inside the comics, and we would have black and white pages. Well, then they were called Canadian whites for that very reason. But these ones are pretty cool. Hard to find. The big publishers were Anglo-American Comics and Maple Leaf and Bell Features were the 3 big publishers for Canadian whites. Very hard to find. There's that one. I'll show a couple more that I have in my collection. Just one more. Another one that's kind of cool one. This is again another Canadian white. And Canadian whites are really from the early 40s all the way up to the 50s. Early 50s. It's when they kind of opened up the market again. So we got Grand Slam Comics here from 1946. So what would happen is, you'll notice like some of these would have like American characters. They would get the publishing rights to produce them in Canada. That's how they got around, the fact that there was this embargo. But definitely, I think it's one of those things that I really do have a lot of faith in Canadian whites as a collectible. just because they are kind of cool. They're obscure, they're rare. And I think that as people learn about them, I think they will go up in value. So definitely one of those things that now is a good time to pick them up because they are still expensive, but I have a feeling they can become even more expensive. So yeah, definitely ones to look for. The next question comes from the Comic Keeper. Is the specter of the dying hobby for real? I see no YouTube channels by people younger than 35. Are there no new or young folks entering the hobby aside from legacy collectors? I don't see the hobby staying very robust in the coming years. Most comics and genres go the way of Western and romance books. Thoughts? Okay. So actually there are a few comic book channels from younger YouTubers. I can think of a few. Obito, Kids Comics is another one. There's a bunch. There's a bunch of these young YouTubers that are kids that are under even 20 that are that are interested in collecting comics. Generally, what it is the people that are those younger ones that are interested in comics and creating YouTube channels based on that are people who have parents that are collectors. So really, it's up to us as older people to encourage our children to embrace the hobby. That's the biggest thing. So as long as we continue like pass the torch to the next generation, well, there will be a torch in the future. Generally, I think that the hobby will have waxings and wanings. Right now, we are in a waning market, but just look, I always think, do people really have short-term memories? I mean, you look at COVID, how the market was just booming. I mean, booming like more than it had in the past 20 years. And yet people still ask this question. Well, you know, there has to be something that infuses that excitement back into the hobby. COVID did that for the hobby. There was this excitement that happened. The MCU did that for the hobby, where it injected some enthusiasm for the comics and the stories of the comic books. Well, if you know, it's really up to the movies that come out and the attitudes of the people and us as ambassadors of the hobby to encourage future generations to enjoy the hobby. I actually see a lot of hope in the future because I see people really enjoying anime, and the demand for anime and manga is really huge. That can easily switch over to comics. It's, you know, the difference is great in terms of the style of the stories, but the concept of, you know, visual plus text, you know, combination is actually better in comics than it is in manga. I think you know, comics actually have better art for the most part. Sorry, manga. And I think that you know, if people are inspired to like comics again, there will be definitely the market there for them. There's enough people, young readers, that are looking at you know, these young comic book related things. I think of Captain Underpants and all these kind of Dogman, and you know, all these books that are basically comic style that young readers are reading, that could easily transition them into reading comics if there is that additional inspiration from either their parents or from the overall culture to encourage them to start reading comics. I mean, it's there. The potential is there. It's just whether we capitalize on that potential or not is the question. So I don't really feel like the comic hobby is dying per se. I just think that it needs a bit of life injected into it. I mean, we're not talking long ago. Like, I mean, COVID was only a few years ago, and it was booming at that time. So, you know, again, ups and downs. So I really do have a lot of faith in the comic community and the comic hobby, I should say. Okay, next question, last question. What character would you like to see on the big screen that hasn't been done yet? Why do you think it could appeal to the masses? Okay, So every so often, you see cultural shifts. If you look at Star Wars, there was a cultural shift with Star Wars where all of a sudden people were into sci-fi. Everything was sci-fi. Every movie that would come out was sci-fi movie. And there was a cultural shift. Um, you look at the horror movies of the 80s, cultural shift. There was like all these, slashers and, horror movies that were really popular. You look at humor comedy movies, all these things were really, really big, now have faded. Well, I do believe there is a demand for those kind of styles of movies. And I do believe that people are kind of looking for something to shift off to. Okay, so that's my prelude for what my answer is here. That we're really in a time where movies have been kind of preachy, not really fun, and we really need something that's a little bit more lighthearted, maybe a little bit more sexy, a little bit more fun, and maybe a little bit retro. And I was thinking that this character kind of fits that bill. So the character I really like, and I used to go on about her all the time. Now I've gotten a complete collection of Miss Mask. Is Miss Mask. This is Miss Mask, Alex Schomburg cover, and I'd really love to see her as a feature movie. You could get Taylor Swift or some sexy girl to play her. Would be, kind of fun. I think women would also embrace it. So, they always try to make movies like for everybody, and I really don't, and it ends up not being liked by anybody. But this is a character where, she's a bit sexy. And generally, actually, women like sexy women in movies too. Despite what Hollywood would tell you nowadays, women like sexy women in movies. Okay, I'm telling you that. Women like fashion. They like, fun stuff. They like retro in terms of fashion. Like the 40s, this is from the 40s, had that kind of cool, kind of classic style. And Miss Mask kind of encapsulates all of that. So I think it would be a really good one that women would enjoy just for the fashion of it. And men would enjoy for the stories. So you got this, sexy woman, and she's, maybe not the overpowered Mary Sue kind of girl. She is very flawed. she's a bored socialite that goes off on adventures, but she's not impervious to being beaten up by a guy. It's like she gets kidnapped, she gets in bondage, she sometimes needs to be bailed out. She is a real female, not like some of the women that we see in movies nowadays. So it would appeal to men, and men really like movies where women are women, and sometimes need to be rescued by a male counterpart. We, as men, we like to rescue women. It's a thing. It's a male. If you look at comic books in general, it's about men protecting women for the most part. And this is a character that kind of straddles that, where she is a independent, assertive woman, but at the same time, she does not ignore the help of men, and she doesn't belittle men to make herself look good. So this is a good character that I think would be fun. I would love to see it done in a retro style. I would love to see it like where the character is really brought to life with respect to the type of attitudes of that more traditional era. Yeah, I think it would be fun because she is somebody that kind of breaking the mold as well back in the day, because she is a superhero female in a male-dominated world. But it's just a really fun character. And I think they could have a lot of fun with it. And I think that's what's really lacking in movies nowadays, that we're so indoctrinated nowadays. It's kind of painful. Having a character that's just fun, a bit sexy, could be interesting. So that's really what I'd like to see. I'd like to see more movies like that where they really let the story drive the movie rather than anything else. So I hope you enjoyed this very long Q&A. Thanks again for watching. If you have a question, please put it in the comments below, and I will do my best to answer it. Thanks again for watching. Bye.